My husband, 29 years old, and I, 29 years old, are both from the same Midwest town. He and his family moved to the Southwest 5 years ago. We rekindled our high school relationship about 4 years ago, and I decided to move to the Southwest to be with him. It was during Infection 19, so I had been laid off from my job and thought it would be a great change of scenery. During these last 4 years, we got married and had a child who is now 1 year old. His whole family lives near us, but we rarely see them, only for holidays. We needed a lot of support when I was pregnant, and his family offered none, but my family flew in to help us. It was kind of eye-opening for me, as I didn't think we would have no support or village. I come from two cultures where being around your extended family is normal, but he and his family like to be left alone and unbothered for the most part. After having my child, things changed drastically. We both had to work to keep afloat, but had no help. We couldn't afford childcare, but no one would help us in his family. I understand they are not obligated to, but the circumstances would be different if we lived closer to my family. My mother would love to watch her first grandchild any chance she got. I am now a stay-at-home mom because I didn't have another choice. It made me miss my family and friends back home a ton. My husband works a lot now to keep us afloat, so it's just me and my toddler, and it can be very lonely. We are now struggling financially because of my lost income, and I can't help but feel like moving back to our hometown would help us. We aren't even sure if we could afford our mortgage. I have had a long discussion about this with my husband, and he refuses to see why it would benefit us moving back. He says he hates that town and state and never wants to go back because he hates the politics of that state, which shocked me, like that's the only reason. My family has shown up for us time and time again, and he knows this, but he hates that state so much and said he will move anywhere else but there. Which is beside the point. We need the help right now or in the near future. Moving to a state where we know no one is no different from our current situation. He then proceeded to say, if I miss my family that much, then I don't love him, and he's not enough to keep me happy. That I should be content with him and my child no matter where we live. I don't understand that logic because I believe I can love him and want our marriage, but also miss having my support system close by. I haven't been able to make any friendships here. I'm still friends with all my friends back in my old town, and we get together every time I visit. They check up on us often. I honestly have the best support system over there. My husband's family is nice, but they just like to keep to themselves. All of them, and he has his parents here and all 5 siblings who also have children. I was hoping to have my child and their kids grow up together, and that's not even the case. Even when I try to make it work, I'm very unhappy here. I thought things would be different, but they're not, and it's no longer a place I see myself raising a child. My husband knows how unhappy I am here and said, well, if we move, I will be unhappy, and it's not fair to him. I would understand if he loved it here and had great relationships here, but sadly he does not. His way of life wouldn't change if we moved. He would just hate it because he moved back to a state he hates. He says I'm not thinking rationally and thinking too emotionally, and this led me here because now I'm not sure what to do. I feel like my marriage just took 10 steps back, and I'm at a loss for words. I don't know what to do or how to fix this situation. Will counseling work? How should we discuss this in the future? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. The politics of that state, as well as the state where you are now, matter a lot these days. In your situation, my first step would be to think hard about a future where your child turns out to be queer and or transgender, or to need a baby unaliving or have a partner who does. What does that look like for your child where you are now? What does it look like where you're going? The baby unaliving issue might be so many years off that you decide not to think about it now. But very little kids can know they're queer or trans, and you and your family might be a lot safer in one place or the other within the next couple of years. So I'd start there. If there's a big difference, that alone could decide the issue. Assuming the states are equally matched in that regard, I'd also consider whether there's a third option that gets you closer to your family without landing you right on top of them in a place your partner hates. Wouldn't solve day-to-day childcare issues, but could certainly help with having your support system close enough for, say, monthly visits. Is there an outside-the-box solution that puts you in a neighboring state to your family in the place you could both be happy enough? But whatever you do, yes, counseling sounds like a good idea. you've got a thorny problem and you're at an impasse. A third party to help you mediate could do a lot of good here. Comment 2. Ultimately, this is all on you. You made a poor decision due to financial stress 4 years ago, upended your roots, and since then married, had a kid, and are now realizing the pitfalls of the original decision. There's no reason you can't work right now to improve the financial situation. To work now, you get a job on the opposite shift/hours from your husband. That way, someone is always with the child. If there's an overlap of hours, you use a babysitter to cover. My wife and I did this for 3 years in order to strengthen finances when our daughter was an infant. Sure, for those few years, we pretty much only had weekends together, but it was totally worth it. To think your hubby is going to upend his career and move somewhere he doesn't like and, in turn, likely damage the financial big picture and stress his own family in the process because you made a bad decision is unlikely. Now, for the update. Thanks for all the comments from my last post. So, a lot has happened in the past week, and it's been, well, interesting of emotions. First off, my husband and I had another serious talk about our situation. This time, I tried to approach it differently. Instead of focusing on moving back to our hometown, I suggested we look into other places where we might have a better support system, or at least a lower cost of living. I thought maybe if I presented it as a compromise, he might be more open to it. Surprisingly, he agreed to at least consider it, which felt like a small victory. We started researching different states and cities, looking at job opportunities, cost of living, and potential support networks. It was a lot of work, but it felt good to be doing something proactive. We even found a couple of places that seemed promising. But then, something unexpected happened. My husband got a call from his boss offering him a promotion. The catch? It would require us to move to a different city in the Southwest, even further from my family. The salary increase would be significant, and it would help us a lot financially. He was excited about the opportunity, and I could see how much it meant to him. But for me, it felt like a punch in the gut. Moving even further away from my family and friends was the last thing I wanted. We spent the next few days discussing the pros and cons. He was so enthusiastic about the promotion, and I didn't want to be the one to hold him back. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore my own feelings. I felt torn between supporting my husband and my own need for a support system. It was a tough spot to be in. During one of our discussions, he admitted something that took me by surprise. He said he felt a lot of pressure to provide for us, and that he thought taking the promotion would make things better for our family. He confessed that he felt guilty for not being able to give me the support I needed, and that he thought this promotion might be a way to make up for it. It was a vulnerable moment for him, and it made me see things from his perspective. But then, just as we were starting to lean towards accepting the promotion, we got another curveball. My mom called and told me that my dad had been diagnosed with a serious illness. She didn't go into too many details, but it was clear that they needed support. This news hit me hard. I felt an overwhelming urge to be there for my parents, just like they had been there for us. I told my husband about my dad's illness, and he was sympathetic. He understood why I felt the need to be with my family, but he also reminded me of the financial struggles we were facing. It felt like we were stuck in a tough situation. I didn't know what to do. We decided to take a few days to think things over. During this time, I reached out to my friends back home and talked to them about what was going on. They were incredibly supportive and offered to help in any way they could. One of my friends even suggested that we move in with her temporarily if we decided to move back. It was a generous offer, and it made me feel a little more hopeful. Meanwhile, my husband was talking to his boss about the promotion and trying to negotiate some flexibility. He asked if there was any way he could work remotely for a few months so that we could move back to our hometown temporarily and be with my family. His boss was surprisingly understanding and said he would consider it. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something. As we waited for his boss's decision, we had another heart-to-heart conversation. My husband admitted that he had been feeling isolated too. He said he missed the sense of community we had back in our hometown, and that he had been trying to convince himself that he was happy here. It was a revelation that made me realize we were both struggling in our own ways. Finally, we got the news we had been waiting for. My husband's boss agreed to let him work remotely for 6 months. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it gave us some breathing room. We decided to move back to our hometown temporarily and see how things went. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The move itself was hectic, but we managed to get everything packed up and ready to go. My friends and family were amazing, helping us with the logistics and offering emotional support. It felt good to be surrounded by people who cared. Once we settled in, I could see a change in my husband. He seemed more relaxed and even started reconnecting with some old friends. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. I also felt a sense of relief being close to my parents and knowing I could be there for them. But before I wrap this up, there's one more thing I need to mention. During this whole process, I found out something that shook me to my core. My husband had been keeping a secret from me. He had been in touch with his ex-girlfriend, who still lived in our hometown. They had been talking on and off for the past few months. When I confronted him about it, he said it was just friendly conversations and that he didn't want to worry me. But it felt like a betrayal, and it added another layer of complexity to our already complicated situation. We had a long and painful discussion about it, and he apologized for not being honest with me. He said he had been feeling lonely and that talking to her was a way to cope. It was a tough pill to swallow, but I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. We agreed to work on our communication and trust issues, but it was clear that we had a lot of work to do. So that's where we are now. We're back in our hometown, trying to figure things out one day at a time. It's not perfect, and there are still a lot of challenges ahead. But for now, we're taking it one step at a time and hoping for the best. Thanks for reading. Aita for confronting my mother about my biological father and demanding answers. Why, 34-year-old female, have been an only child my whole life. My mom, 63-year-old female, is a single mother and raised me by herself, but never ever told me or talked about my biological father. I never had a father figure. My grandparents were separated since I remember, and my grandfather lived in another state, so we did not have a relationship with him. My mother did marry when I was 6 years old, but her partner was not what you would say a good father figure. He was an alcoholic and cheated on her several times. They were only married for 7 years. I did ask my mom a couple of times when I was younger about my biological father, but she only told me that it was a friend of hers that was not ready to be a father, and that is why he was not with us. But I never knew who he was or even knew his name. For a lot of time, I did not bother to ask her about my biological dad anymore. I used to say that I was not interested in someone that didn't even want to know me and that I didn't need him. I now am married and have 2 boys, and for a while now wonder who my biological dad is. One of my children was diagnosed with autism, and that triggered a lot of questions from my biological dad's side. If I could have some genetic problems that I or my children need to be aware of, and started to get a little bit anxious about that to the point that I seek help with a therapist to help me confront my mom and ask her about my biological dad. I just hate confrontation and was scared that this could break in some way the relationship between me and my mom. A few days ago, I got brave and asked my mom about my biological dad, and she told me that he did not want to be a part of our lives because he was a married man and told me his name. As soon as I got to my house, without my mom and when the children were asleep, I ran to the internet and searched for this man. It took me a while, but I found him. I got a little bit shocked and could not stop looking at his posts and photos. It turns out that he is not only married, but he has also at least 4 daughters, 3 older than me, and 1 my age. I honestly don't know what to do. I am curious to talk to the man and see if he will answer my questions, but I do not know how to approach him. I don't want to make a mess in anyone's life, but I think I deserve to be heard. This makes me feel like the hidden child, and I think I deserve at least a conversation. I do not want to hurt my mom in any way because she kept this hidden for 34 years, but I know that it is my right to know where I came from. What would you do? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. They are not stepsisters, they are your half-sisters, assuming you all have the same dad. A stepsister is not a blood relation. It's when one of your parents marries someone who already has kids from a previous relationship. I had to explain this to my significant other. He has 2 older half-brothers, all have the same mom, and kept referring to them as his stepbrothers. I would be so curious if I were you. Contacting them could ruin your dad's life. but they may be very interested in learning they have siblings, though maybe not. Tough choice. Comment 2. A good friend is in this situation. She reached out. He wanted nothing to do with her and told her not to reach out to anyone in his family. She didn't even get to have a conversation or meet him in person. The rejection devastated her. Your father has known about you your entire life. If he hasn't tried to be a parent to you by now, there is a high chance he isn't interested. I think you just really need to be prepared that your reaching out might not be welcome and could potentially actually be met with hostility. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for reading my last post. So, here's what's happened since then. After finding out about my biological dad and his family, I decided to take a few days to process everything. I was torn between reaching out to him and respecting the life he had built without me. The curiosity was eating me up, but I was also scared of the potential fallout. My therapist suggested writing a letter to him, not necessarily to send, but to organize my thoughts and feelings. So, I did just that. I poured my heart out on paper, explaining who I was, what I had discovered, and why I wanted to connect. It was cathartic, but it also made me realize how much I needed answers. On the second day, I decided to take a bold step. I found his email address through some online sleuthing and sent a brief, respectful message. I introduced myself, mentioned that I believed he was my biological father, and asked if he would be willing to talk. I was nervous but felt it was the right thing to do. I didn't want to disrupt his life, but I needed to know more about my origins, especially for my children's sake. To my surprise, he responded the next day. His email was cautious but not dismissive. He acknowledged that he remembered my mother and admitted that there was a possibility he could be my father. He suggested we meet in person to discuss things further. I was shocked and relieved at the same time. I didn't expect him to be so open to the idea of meeting me. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe in a nearby town to avoid any potential awkward encounters with his family. The meeting was nerve-wracking. When I saw him, I could see some resemblance, which made everything feel more real. We talked for hours. He confirmed that he had an affair with my mother and that he knew about her pregnancy, but chose to stay with his wife and daughters. He apologized for not being there for me and explained that he thought it was best for everyone involved at the time. During our conversation, he revealed something unexpected. He had been diagnosed with a genetic heart condition a few years ago, which could be hereditary. This information was crucial for my children's health, and I was grateful he shared it with me. We exchanged contact information and agreed to keep in touch, but he asked me to keep our meeting private for now, as he needed time to figure out how to tell his family. The fallout from this meeting was intense. I felt a mix of emotions: relief, anger, sadness, and confusion. I was glad to have some answers, but I also felt the weight of the secrets and lies that had shaped my life. I decided to tell my mom about the meeting. She was upset at first, worried about the potential consequences, but she understood my need for answers. We had a long, heartfelt conversation about the past, and it brought us closer in a way I didn't expect. In the days that followed, I noticed changes in my behavior and emotions. I was more anxious and found it hard to focus on my daily tasks. My husband was supportive, but I could tell he was worried about me. I decided to take a step back and focus on my mental health. I continued my therapy sessions and started journaling to process my feelings. One evening, while I was journaling, I remembered a story my mom had told me about her childhood. She had a difficult relationship with her own father, who was emotionally distant and often absent. This made me realize that her decision to keep my father's identity a secret was influenced by her own experiences. She wanted to protect me from the pain she had endured. This understanding didn't excuse her actions, but it helped me empathize with her. As I navigated through these emotions, I also had to consider the impact on my children. I decided to have a conversation with my older son about family and genetics in a way he could understand. I explained that sometimes families have secrets and that it's important to know our health history. He was curious, but didn't seem too affected by the information, which was a relief. In the midst of all this, I received an unexpected message from one of my half-sisters. She had found out about me through our father and wanted to connect. This was another emotional roller coaster. We exchanged messages and eventually met in person. She was kind and understanding, and we bonded over our shared experiences. She also shared some insights into our father's life and their family dynamics, which helped me understand him better. As I reflect on these past few days, I realize that this journey is far from over. There are still many conversations to be had and emotions to process, but I feel a sense of closure knowing more about my origins and having connected with my biological father and half-sister. It's a bittersweet feeling, knowing that I've gained something, but also lost the simplicity of not knowing. Thank you for reading. Thank you, Aita, for telling my partner to grow up and stop ruining our movie nights. On our first weekend away, we were talking about movies we loved, and I suggested we actually watch some of them. We started with his pick, Paths of Glory, a really amazing Stanley Kubrick film. In the middle of it, as soldiers are being forced to evacuate the trenches and are being gunned down by the enemy, he paused the movie and said, "I just realized you are going to go home and tell everyone about how I made you watch a war movie on our romantic getaway." I confirmed with a smile that this was exactly what was about to happen, but asked to finish the movie. I then asked him to watch Pride and Prejudice, 2005, with me. He Mystery Science Theater 3000. Ed the heck out of it, to the point that I stopped the movie and asked to do something else, because it was so painful to watch someone shoot on something I legitimately enjoyed. He eventually convinced me to start it again and stayed quiet, but certainly not engaged. Definitely was not great vibes. This has been a continued trend. I have a family tradition of watching the Muppet Christmas Carol. Silly, I know, but beautiful and a good tradition. And he just walked away in the middle of my big family party and started working on his computer. I suggested we watch the 1983 Pirates of Penzance, and he couldn't make it through the first act. At art museums, I've had to ask to walk through alone so that I can actually have an experience that isn't about trying to laugh at someone's sarcastic remarks. Most recently, I recommended that we watch a movie I'd read good reviews about, Netflix's Hitman. In the middle of the movie, he says, "Oh, this reminds me of American Psycho." He stops the movie and switches over to get us started watching American Psycho before realizing unprompted how incredibly rude this was and switching back. I appreciate this, but it still indicates what a different experience we were having with the movie. This week, he introduced me to another TV series. I like it. However, after hearing how much I liked it, he told me he felt like our similar taste in movies was a good sign for the relationship, and contrasted that with feeling like his ex-wife wouldn't engage with the things he liked. The irony felt so palpable to me. I feel like it's a sign that I am willing to invest in the things he enjoys, but certainly the reverse is not true. Part of me thinks, fuck it, he doesn't have to have good taste. Part of me wishes that I could actually share things that amuse or inspire me with him. And I can't. I haven't had such a stark gap in ability to enjoy media before. For those who have the same experience, how has it been for you? Now for an update. All of the people who pointed out that I needed to sit him down and talk about it. I appreciate your calls to maturity, even as I also appreciate all the people who validated that some of his behavior has not been okay. I started the conversation by saying, I feel worried that you say our shared taste in movies is a good sign, because I don't think we do always have shared taste. And I now actively avoid sharing movies I like with you. He immediately understood where I was going with this and validated that he hasn't appreciated or been respectful about stuff I like. He said, I actually liked Sense and Sensibility, and when I covered my face and reminded him it was Pride and Prejudice, he looked appropriately abashed and pointed out that he is trying. We watched the last episode of the show he recommended, and he asked me what I wanted to watch next, so we laughed through an episode of Brooklyn 99. We've been in this relationship for well over a year now and are doing couples therapy. When I talk about things he's done in therapy, he acknowledges that he's done those things, that he doesn't want to be the kind of person who does those things, and that past partners have had similar concerns. I've met his family, and they don't seem like the kind of people who would raise an a-hole, but I think he was both the golden child and an outsider in the family. He seems to be sincerely trying to get better and is able to talk things through. But in certain areas, I feel as though I am training one of my kids, we each have two, how to be a grown-up. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. He told me he felt like our similar taste in movies was a good sign for the relationship, and contrasted that with feeling like his ex-wife wouldn't engage with the things he liked. He views himself as the main character and you as the sidekick. I'm guessing he also doesn't get your jokes and only thinks you have a good sense of humor while laughing at his jokes. That you're smart when you agree with him and just don't understand or are too emotional when you disagree. Your growing unease is leading you to the correct conclusions. Follow them. Comment 2. I'm the same age as you and have noticed this a lot in men over the years. Like, they are so excited to share their favorite movies, games, shows, whatever, but when it's me hyping something, they suddenly couldn't be less interested in the conversation. It definitely stings. At this point, I don't really bother with those types, like, frick you. I have good taste. Also, the 2005 Pride and Prejudice is a great movie. So is Muppet Christmas Carol. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for reading. So, this past week has been a bit of, interesting. After our last conversation, I thought we were making progress, but something happened that really tested our relationship. We were planning a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods, just to get away from everything and spend some quality time together. I was really looking forward to it, especially after our recent talks and therapy sessions. We got to the cabin on Friday evening, and everything seemed perfect. We had a nice dinner, played some board games, and even watched a movie that we both enjoyed. It felt like we were finally on the same page. But then, on Saturday morning, he got a call from his boss. There was some kind of emergency at work, and they needed him to handle it. He assured me it would only take a couple of hours, so I reluctantly agreed. Those couple of hours turned into the entire day. I spent most of Saturday alone, hiking and reading a book I brought along. By the time he was done with work, it was already evening. He apologized profusely and promised to make it up to me. But I was really upset. I felt like our weekend was ruined and all the progress we had made was slipping away. We had a big argument that night. I told him how I felt, and he admitted that he didn't know how to balance work and personal life. He said he felt a lot of pressure to perform at work, especially after his divorce, and that he didn't want to let anyone down. I understood where he was coming from, but it didn't make me feel any better. I told him that I needed to feel like a priority in his life, not just an afterthought. The next day, we tried to salvage what was left of the weekend. We went for a long hike together and talked about our future. He promised to set better boundaries with work and to make more time for us. I could see that he was sincere, but I still had my doubts. It felt like we were at a crossroads, and I wasn't sure which way we would go. When we got back home, things were tense. We both went back to our routines, but there was an unspoken tension between us. I decided to take a risk and plan a surprise date night for us. I booked a reservation at a nice restaurant and got tickets to a play that I knew he would enjoy. I wanted to show him that I was still invested in our relationship and that I was willing to make an effort. The date night turned out to be a turning point for us. He was genuinely surprised and touched by the effort I put into planning everything. We had a great time at the restaurant, and the play was amazing. On the way home, he thanked me for the evening and said that he realized how much he had been taking me for granted. He promised to do better and to make more time for us. Since then, things have been better. He's been more attentive and has made a real effort to balance work and personal life. We've had a few more date nights, and he's even started watching some of my favorite movies without making sarcastic comments. It feels like we're finally on the same page, and I'm hopeful for our future. But before I get into that, let me tell you a bit more about his past. He grew up in a family where he was both the golden child and an outsider. His parents had high expectations for him, and he always felt the need to prove himself. This pressure carried over into his adult life, and it's something he's still struggling with. He told me that his ex-wife never understood this about him, and that it was one of the reasons their marriage fell apart. I also learned that he had a difficult time adjusting after his divorce. He threw himself into his work as a way to cope, and it became his main focus. He admitted that he didn't know how to balance work and personal life, and that it was something he needed to work on. This was a big revelation for me, and it helped me understand why he acted the way he did. As for me, I've been trying to be more patient and understanding. I know that change doesn't happen overnight and that it takes time and effort. I've also been working on setting boundaries and communicating my needs more clearly. It's not always easy, but I feel like we're making progress. So that's where we are now. We're still in therapy, and it's been really helpful for both of us. We're learning how to communicate better and to understand each other's needs. It's not always easy, but I feel like we're on the right track. Thanks for reading. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.